Welcome to Samara Training. This is part of our Occupational Health and Safety series. This talk is about a bow tie analysis and looking at it for the application of radiation in the workplace. My name is Jonathan Scopes. First, a bow tie. A bow tie is the picture there, and the thing at the top is the hazard, and it's in the hazard box. It can be any hazard, and we're looking generally on this slide. Because of that hazard, a top event can occur. The top event is a harmful event. It might be harmful to the person, or to equipment, or to the company in some way. Before the top event happens, there are threats. Threats are things that would cause the top event to happen. If the threat happens, the top event happens. So we try to manage that threat by introducing barriers. Barriers are controls to control the threat and to stop it, we hope, from happening. But even with the barriers, the top event may happen. If the top event happens, there will be consequences. They happen after the top event, and because of the top event, the consequence has happened. We can make the consequence less bad by introducing mitigations. So instead of having a big consequence, the consequence has happened, but before it grows anymore, we put some mitigations in place to limit it. Let's move on to think about this and apply it to radiation. So our hazard is the radiation source, and the top event is exposure to harmful radiation. So if we're exposed to radiation, it's potentially carcinogenic, potentially it can cause cancer. So, what are we going to do? Well, in this case, we've introduced 5 threats that we're going to try to manage. The first threat is, why use radiation at all? The second threat is, we don't know enough about it. The third threat is, we're exposed to it for a long time. The fourth threat is, we're too close to it. And the fifth threat is, we have nothing between us, no shielding between us and the radiation. So now we'll look at each of these in turn and put some barriers in place. So for the use of radiation, we should challenge ourselves and say, do we need to use radiation at all? Is there another way of doing this work or this type of work without radiation? We need to justify and say there is a real reason, a genuine reason for us to be involved with radioactive material. And another barrier would be, if we have radiation, optimize the amount. If you only need a small amount, only have a small amount. Don't have a lot if all you need is a little. Or can you modify your process so instead of needing a lot of radiation, you need a little bit. So these would be 2 barriers to the use of radiation. The next one down is lack of information. Where can we get information about how to manage radioactive materials? Well, one way is to employ a specialist, a radiation safety officer, an RSO, or radiation protection advisor, an RPA, someone who's a specialist safety person with knowledge about radiation. We can get guidance from the industry. There may be industry guidance to help us how to manage radiation. There may be laws about how to manage radiation. Industry standards are available, how to manage radiation in practice. And then you can train your people. You can train your staff in how to manage radioactive materials, how to handle them, and so on. So these are barriers to overcome the lack of information. The next one on our list is someone's exposed for a long time to the radiation, perhaps because they work with it day in, day out. Well, what can we do? Well, we can reduce the time. We can introduce rest breaks to get them away from the radiation. We can have job rotation, so they work on it perhaps for one day and then not again for another week. So they get a break from the radiation. We can limit the number of hours they work in each day, maybe 1 hour per day. Or we can measure their dose. We can get individual dose meters which measure how much radiation they're exposed to, and when it gets up to a certain level we can say stop. No more radiation work for you for a period of time, maybe a day or a week or longer. So we can manage the time that people are exposed. The next threat is lack of distance. We're too close to the source of the radiation. Obvious thing to do is increase the distance, so we can move away from the source of radiation. We can put up signs to protect other people. We can have zoning. Zoning is where you exclude people from certain areas because of the risk. It might be that only 2 or 3 people are allowed to go into the radiation workshop and the doors are locked otherwise. And that's access restrictions. So with these things we can introduce controls to overcome the fact that we were too close to the radiation. The fifth threat is no shielding. So how can we introduce shielding? Well, one way is to store the radiation when we're not using it in what's called a magazine, which is a controlled area with a fence, and the room is locked and it has very thick walls and no windows and a thick roof, so the radiation is contained in the magazine. Another way is to have strong boxes, specially designed heavy boxes, to keep the radiation inside the box when we're moving the radiation from the magazine to the workshop and then from the workshop to the place of work. We can have inventory control. That means we know where our stock of radiation is. This person has got this piece, that person's got that piece, and all the rest is in the store, the magazine. And at the end of the day, we can check it's all back in. We've not left any out for someone to be exposed to. That's inventory control. And then we can limit the stock. We don't have to have big supplies. We can have the minimum amount, the optimum amount that we need to do the work. If we put those things in place, we have completed one side of our bow tie diagram. So we have 5 threats and we have barriers for each one to try and control it. Unfortunately, the barriers can fail. If the barriers fail, people or a person will be exposed to the radiation. If they're exposed to the radiation, there will be consequences. So we can have 2 consequences that we thought about for this diagram. The first is they're exposed to the radiation. What can we do about it? Well, we can measure the amount of radiation they've been exposed to and take actions as a result of those measurements. We could have first aiders who are trained to manage people who've been exposed to radiation, and we can give time off work so they have a rest from any exposure to radiation at all. The other consequence is we have environmental contamination. So if we spill some of this radioactive material somewhere, what can we do? Well, before that happens, we put in place the emergency plan. The emergency plan will come into effect after the spill. So the consequence happens, the radioactive material is spilled, but now we have a plan. We know what to do to make it less worse. We can have spill kits ready and available. So we move the material with the spill kit so that if there is a spill, we can tidy it up. And we've had practice drills and know what to do in that emergency. We can train our staff so they know how to do it, and the drills will help us be quick to tidy up and clear up and control the radiation and put it back in a secure container and back in the magazine storage. If we put that on a bow tie diagram, we have 2 consequences in red, and each has got controls. So the radiation exposure on the top has time off work for the individual. We have radiation first aiders to manage the person, and we have radiation health surveillance so that the exposure is less harmful than it might otherwise have been. And then on the environmental contamination, we have the emergency plan. We're ready and able to manage the situation. We have the spill kits, we have the equipment put the plan in place. We have training. The training is ready. People are trained to use the spill kits and carry out the emergency plan. And we have drills, so we practice and we know that we can do it. We can put this all together into our bow tie diagram, and here it is. So in this case we have, in the blue boxes, 5 threats, and they're controlled by 19 barriers. On the right hand side we have 2 consequences in red boxes, and they're managed, they're mitigated, made less worse by the 7 mitigations. And that's the bow tie diagram. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn and Facebook. Thank you.